Hello and welcome to this video on market structures. So in this video we're going to introduce the concept of market structures and in particular look at the ways in which economists characterize different market structures. So what do we mean by market structures? Well, when we talk about different market structures, we're really talking about the characteristics of a market and how that determines the firm's behavior within that market. So if we're talking about the farming market, or if we're talking about the mobile phone handset market, we're looking at trying to describe the characteristics there and then how that affects how firms behave in that market. So when we're talking about characteristics, we normally focus on 5 different types. First of all, we talk about the size and number of firms in the market. Are there lots of firms? Are they big? Are they small? Then we tend to talk about barriers to entry or exit, and this is effectively how easy it is for firms to enter or leave this market. We also talk about the extent to which the goods in the market are similar or whether they're quite different. We call that homogeneity. We talk about the level of knowledge shared by firms in the market. And finally, we talk about the extent in that market as to how much the actions of one firm affect another firm, interdependence. So we're going to go through each of these characteristics in more detail. So often we talk about barriers to entry within a market. And effectively a barriers to entry is talking about how easy it is for new companies or new businesses to enter that particular market. So firms in an industry that's unlikely to experience many new entrants, much competition coming into the market, might behave quite differently to those that operate in an industry which has low barriers to entry, i.e. competitors can enter the market quite easily. So on the right hand side we have some examples of things that cause barriers to entry. Economies of scale, vertically integrated supply chains, brand and consumer loyalty, technological advantages, or maybe certain expertise or reputation. Some additional barriers that we should be aware of: takeovers and acquisitions, product differentiation, capacity expansion, limit pricing, predatory pricing, patents, and legal barriers. So we may prevent people entering the market because we have taken over that particular business or acquired that particular business. It might be difficult for people to enter the market because our product is very different, quite unique, and they can't compete. Maybe we have such a large capacity that we benefit from economies of scale and our costs are too low for them to compete with. Limit pricing is where we reduce the level of profit in the marketplace to make it less attractive for firms to enter. Predatory pricing is where we price below the cost, so we make a loss in the short term and have such a low price that new entrants can't compete. Patents, so maybe we have some legal protection, they can't enter the market because they cannot copy our idea. Maybe there's a legal barrier, maybe you need a license to enter this particular market, and without the license you can't enter. So these are all ways in which the barriers to entry might exist. A common barrier to entry is a cost barrier. So for example, here we have 2 firms, firm B and their cost curve, and firm A and their cost curve. Now for firm A, they have a serious cost advantage over firm B. They have much lower costs, and as a result it's very difficult for firm B to compete with firm A. Here's another example. On the left hand side we have an industry or a business here, and the minimum efficient scale, the lowest average cost, is quite achievable. It's at quite a low level of output, so potentially other firms will be able to enter this industry where the minimum scale to operate at the lowest point in the average cost curve is quite low. So there might be quite a lot of contestability, so there might be a lot of firms that can compete in this market. On the right hand side we can see really that only the very large firms can compete here. Only the firms that have high levels of output operate right down here in terms of output. Only they can compete in terms of average cost. So we're much more likely to have low levels of contestability and fewer firms in this market. Often we call these markets natural monopolies, where you have to be very, very large in order to benefit from the lowest average cost. and as a result, low levels of competition. Sometimes we have barriers to exit, so actually it might be quite hard for a firm to leave the industry. Or it might be that it costs quite a lot to leave the industry. So for example, selling off stock or premises, making staff redundant. We might have contracts in place that mean we can't just renege on the contract and leave the industry. However, these are normally quite low. Okay, our next characteristic is about homogeneity of the product. So goods which are quite identical we call homogeneous goods. So for example, coal from one company is very similar to coal from another company. A vegetable from one farmer is very similar to a vegetable from another farmer. So these firms tend to have less control over their market. Goods which are differentiated we call non-homogeneous. So branding, for example, may be a way to achieve this in the fashion industry. As a result, these firms have much more control over their market and more control over the price they're able to charge their customers. Our third characteristic is about knowledge. We talk about the different levels of knowledge within a market. So when we talk about perfect knowledge or perfect information, this means that buyers and sellers in this market have lots of information about prices, about different types of products, and about levels of output. This information is easily available. So for example, in farming, we know the price of a tomato and what a tomato is. When we don't have perfect knowledge, or there's a lack of knowledge in the market, we call it asymmetric information or imperfect knowledge. And where this exists, firms will have more control over their market. So for example, in pensions, it's hard for someone taking out a pension to know exactly what is a good deal or exactly how that money should be invested to provide them with a pension. As a result, pensions firms have more control over their market than farmers do. Our fourth category was about interrelationships. And so here we have two types. We have independent firms, where as they act has little impact on any other firm in the industry. And we have interdependent firms, and that's where the actions of one firm does have an impact on other firms within the industry. So with these five characteristics in mind, so the number and size of firms, and then barriers to entry exit, homogeneity, knowledge, and interdependence, we can use these characteristics to describe different types of market. And we're really going to look at four different types of market: perfect competition, imperfect or monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. And we're going to go through and look at these different markets and look at the characteristics that these particular markets have and how they affect the behavior of firms within those markets. So in this video, we've looked at the different ways that economists tend to characterize market structures. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.